The sound of Sarah's laughter echoed across the quiet, expensive restaurant, sharp enough to cut through glass. "Look at you," she sneered, her eyes scanning my faded 5-year-old jacket. "You're pathetic. You're just a broke single dad trying to play the hero." I tightened my grip on my 6-year-old daughter's small hand. Lily was hiding behind my leg, terrified of the woman who was supposed to be her mother. Sarah leaned across the marble table, tapping her manicured nails against the custody papers she had practically shoved into my chest the moment we walked in. She wasn't just here to take my daughter. She was here to completely destroy whatever dignity I had left. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady for Lily's sake. "Sarah, you haven't seen her in 3 years. You walked out on us for a wealthy banker, and now you suddenly want full custody?" Sarah let out another condescending laugh, taking a sip of her champagne. "My husband and I can give her a real life. Good schools, vacations in Europe, a proper home. What can you give her? You can barely afford to buy her a decent meal." She gestured mockingly around the upscale restaurant. "I bet you spent your entire week's salary just walking through the front doors of this place." People at the tables around us were starting to stare. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation that she always knew exactly how to inflict. She thrived on making me feel small. But she had no idea that the man sitting across from her today was not the same broken husband she had abandoned 3 years ago. She didn't know that my faded jacket and quiet demeanor were a choice, a carefully crafted shield. "Sign the papers, David," she demanded, her voice dropping to a cold, venomous whisper. "If you make me take this to court, my lawyers will tear you to pieces. I'll make sure you never see her again." She slid an expensive gold pen across the table. It rolled and hit my coffee cup with a sharp clink. I stared at the pen, then looked down at Lily, who was looking up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Don't let her take me, Daddy," she whispered, her tiny voice trembling. My heart clenched. I reached out and gently stroked her hair, offering her a reassuring smile. I wasn't going to lose my daughter. Not today, not ever. I picked up the gold pen. Sarah smiled, a triumphant, cruel smirk spreading across her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally broken me. But just as the tip of the pen touched the thick paper, a sudden hush fell over the entire restaurant. The soft background music seemed to fade away. I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of expensive leather shoes approaching our table. A towering man in a sharp, custom-tailored Italian suit stopped right behind my chair. Sarah's cruel smirk instantly vanished. Her eyes widened in absolute shock and recognition. I knew exactly who she was looking at. It was Marcus Vance, the ruthless billionaire CEO of Vanguard Holdings. The man owned half the real estate in the city and was known for tearing down corporations just for fun. Sarah's wealthy new husband actually worked for a subsidiary of Vanguard, making Marcus essentially a god in her eyes. Sarah immediately sat up straight, practically pushing the custody papers aside. She plastered on a fake, overly sweet smile, desperate to make an impression. "Mr. Vance," she gasped, her voice dripping with desperation. "What an absolute honor to see you here. She didn't even get to finish her sentence. Marcus didn't look at her. He didn't even acknowledge her existence. Instead, the most powerful, intimidating man in the city respectfully buttoned his suit jacket, bowed his head slightly toward me, and said in a loud, clear voice that echoed through the silent restaurant, "I apologize for the interruption, boss. The board members are waiting for your final approval on the $70 million acquisition." The silence in the restaurant grew so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sarah's jaw practically hit the floor. Her hand, which was hovering in the air just moments ago, began to visibly tremble. She looked from the towering figure of Marcus Vance back to me, her eyes darting back and forth frantically as if trying to solve a puzzle her brain simply couldn't process. "Boss?" she finally choked out, her voice cracking in the middle of the quiet room. "Mr. Vance, I think there's been some sort of mistake. This is David. He's nobody. He doesn't even have a real job. He's just a struggling freelancer." Marcus didn't even blink. He slowly turned his head to look at Sarah, his icy gaze sweeping over her with absolute, unfiltered disgust. I do not make mistakes, madam, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm and echoing with authority. And I would highly suggest you lower your tone when speaking to the majority shareholder and true founder of Vanguard Holdings, the man who signs my paychecks. The color drained completely from Sarah's face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. The expensive champagne in her glass suddenly seemed entirely meaningless. Founder? She whispered, staring at my faded jacket as if seeing it for the very first time. I calmly placed the gold pen back on the table. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. True power never needs to raise its voice. I looked directly into her terrified eyes, letting the suffocating silence stretch until she squirmed under my gaze. I told you 3 years ago, Sarah. I told you I was building something from the ground up. You just didn't have the patience to stick around for the foundation to set. You wanted quick money, so you ran off with a banker. I picked up the thick stack of custody papers she had shoved at me. Slowly, deliberately, I ripped them directly down the middle, the sharp tearing sound echoing loudly between us. Then I stacked the halves and ripped them again, letting the torn, useless pieces flutter down onto her expensive designer plate. Lily stays with me. You are never taking her. Not now, not ever. Sarah was hyperventilating now, clutching the edge of the marble table so hard her knuckles turned white. You can't do this, she stammered, desperation replacing her earlier arrogance. My husband, Richard, is a senior vice president. He has the best lawyers in the city. He works for. She trailed off, her mouth falling open as a look of pure, unadulterated horror dawned on her face. Her brain had finally connected the dots. He works for Vanguard Banking. I finished her sentence, a cold, humorless smile touching my lips. Which means, as of this morning's corporate acquisition, I nodded slightly to Marcus. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sleek, black leather folder, placing it gently on the table right in front of Sarah. As of this morning, Marcus stated smoothly, your husband's entire division has been restructured, and his continued employment, along with his pension and stock options, is currently resting entirely on David's desk. Sarah let out a strangled gasp, both hands flying up to cover her mouth. She had tried to corner a stray dog, only to realize she had walked blindly into a lion's den. Tears of absolute panic started welling up in her eyes. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't even played my winning hand yet. I reached across the table and opened the black leather folder Marcus had brought. But Richard's employment isn't the most interesting thing my auditors found during the corporate financial review, is it, Sarah? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I pulled out a single, glossy photograph from the folder and slid it across the marble table until it rested right under her nose. It was a picture that made her face turn from pale to a sickly, terrifying shade of white. She stopped breathing entirely. Sarah's eyes were fixed on the glossy photograph as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The picture wasn't of me, and it wasn't of her. It was a crystal clear surveillance image of her perfect, wealthy husband, Richard, sitting in a dimly lit hotel lobby, handing a thick manila envelope to a man my corporate security team had already identified as a notorious offshore money launderer. Next to the photo was a printed bank ledger, highlighted in bright, unforgiving yellow. I don't understand, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. She looked up at me, the arrogant, condescending woman from 10 minutes ago, now completely shattered. Richard would never do this. He has a trust fund. He comes from old money. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, closing the distance between us. Richard lied to you, Sarah. Just like you lied to yourself. There is no trust fund. There is no old money. For the past 2 years, your husband has been secretly siphoning millions of dollars from Vanguard Banking's private client accounts to fund your lavish lifestyle. I pointed a cold finger at the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The European vacations you were just bragging about? The designer clothes? That necklace you're wearing right now? It was all bought with stolen money. My money? Sarah instinctively reached up and grabbed the necklace, looking at it as if it were suddenly burning her skin. No, that's impossible. You're making this up to scare me. You're just trying to manipulate me into giving up Lily. Marcus Vance stepped closer, his imposing shadow falling over her completely. Our forensic accounting team has already compiled a 70-page dossier, madam, Marcus stated, his voice completely devoid of any pity. $17 million in embezzled corporate funds. We have the offshore wire transfers, the fake shell corporations, and his forged signatures. It is a severe federal offense. Once the boss hands this file over to the authorities, your husband will be facing a minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. And since your name is listed as a primary beneficiary on the joint accounts that received those stolen funds, the authorities will be indicting you right alongside him. A loud, pathetic sob escaped Sarah's throat. She covered her face with her shaking hands, the reality of her situation crashing down on her like a concrete wall. She wasn't just losing a custody battle today. She was about to lose her freedom, her wealth, and her entire fake reality. The woman who had walked into this restaurant treating me like dirt on her shoe was now completely, utterly trapped in a cage of her own making. "David, please," she begged, looking up at me with thick black mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her perfect, expensive makeup. The haughty, venomous tone was entirely gone, replaced by pure, desperate panic. "Please, you can't do this to me. We were married. We loved each other once. You know I'm not a criminal. Richard told me the money was from his investments. I swear to you, I didn't know anything about this." She reached across the table, desperately trying to grab my hand, but I pulled it away instantly. Her touch disgusted me. "Don't play the victim here, Sarah. You didn't care where the money came from as long as you could spend it. You abandoned your own daughter for a life of luxury, and now that the bill has finally come due, you want mercy?" I looked down at Lily. My sweet, innocent little girl was sitting quietly on her chair, holding tightly onto the sleeve of my faded jacket, watching the woman who broke our family completely fall apart. I gently reached down and covered Lily's ears, not wanting her to hear the ugliness of what came next. "I hold your entire life in my hands right now," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register that made her flinch. "I could make one single phone call to the FBI, and you and Richard would be arrested in handcuffs before you even reached the restaurant's parking lot. I could take absolutely everything from you, just like you tried to take everything from me." Sarah was openly weeping now, completely uncaring that the rest of the wealthy patrons in the restaurant were watching her total humiliation. "Tell me what you want," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking in defeat. "I'll do anything. Please, David. Just tell me what you want me to do." I held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. Then I slowly slid a fresh, blank document from the black folder and placed it on the marble table, right next to the torn pieces of her original custody demand. Next to the paper, I placed the gold pen she had tried to force on me just minutes earlier. "Read it carefully," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I tapped my finger against the blank document resting on the marble table. "This is a legally binding, fully irrevocable surrender of all your parental rights. You will officially waive any future claim to custody or visitation. You will never approach Lily's school, you will never call my phone, and you will completely forget that we exist. If you ever try to contact us again, even once, this entire forensic audit folder goes straight to the federal prosecutor." Sarah stared down at the document. Her chest heaved as she struggled to breathe through her panicked sobbing. She looked around the restaurant, searching for a way out, for someone to help her, but the other wealthy patrons simply looked away in disgust. She had built her entire new life on arrogance and stolen money, and now the fragile glass house she lived in was shattering into a million sharp pieces around her. With a violently shaking hand, she reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen. The very same pen she had arrogantly slid across the table to me just 20 minutes ago, expecting me to surrender my daughter. Slowly, she pressed the gold tip to the paper. I watched in absolute silence as she signed her name at the bottom of the document, her heavy tears falling and smudging the dark black ink. When she was finished, she dropped the pen. It clattered loudly against the table. I smoothly pulled the document toward me, checked the signature, and handed it directly to Marcus. "It's done," Sarah whispered, her voice completely broken. She wiped her ruined mascara with the back of her trembling hand. "I signed it. You have what you want. Now please, let me go home. Don't call the FBI. I slowly stood up from my chair. I am not calling the authorities today, Sarah. I am a man of my word. You and your husband get to keep your freedom. I leaned over the table, forcing her to look up into my eyes. But just because I'm not sending you to prison doesn't mean you get to walk away with my money. Sarah froze, the blood draining from her face all over again. What? What do you mean? I nodded to Marcus. The towering CEO stepped forward, buttoning his jacket with practiced elegance. Madam, Marcus stated coldly, by the time you return to your estate this evening, Vanguard's legal team will have permanently frozen all of your joint bank accounts, credit cards, and offshore trust funds. Tomorrow morning, our asset recovery division will begin the legal process of seizing your mansion, your luxury vehicles, and all purchased assets to recoup the stolen $17 million. Your husband is officially terminated, effective immediately. No, Sarah gasped, clutching her diamond necklace as if she could protect it. No, you can't take everything. How am I supposed to live? Where am I supposed to go? That is no longer my concern, I replied, my voice as cold as ice. 3 years ago, you looked me in the eye and told me that being broke was a disease you refused to catch. You left a good, honest man and abandoned your own child just to chase the illusion of wealth. Well, the illusion is over. You can keep the clothes on your back, Sarah. Everything else belongs to Vanguard. I turned away from her, completely dismissing her existence. I reached down and gently scooped my 6-year-old daughter into my arms. Lily wrapped her small arms tightly around my neck, resting her head against my shoulder. Let's go, boss, Marcus said respectfully, stepping aside and gesturing toward the exit. As I walked through the upscale restaurant carrying my daughter in my faded jacket, the heavy silence remained. But the wealthy patrons who had looked at me with disdain earlier were now practically holding their breath, parting like the Red Sea to let us pass. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see Sarah sitting alone, weeping at that empty marble table, knowing she was walking out of this restaurant with absolutely nothing. We stepped out of the heavy glass doors and into the cool evening air. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets slick and glowing under the streetlights. Waiting directly at the curb was a massive, gleaming black Maybach SUV. A private driver in a sharp suit immediately rushed out, opening the heavy rear door for us and bowing his head respectfully. I settled Lily into the plush leather seat and climbed in beside her. The door shut with a solid, comforting thud, completely blocking out the noise of the city. Lily looked around the luxurious interior with wide, amazed eyes, then looked up at me. "Daddy?" she whispered softly. "Are we going back to our little apartment?" I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes for the first time in years. I gently brushed a stray curl behind her ear. "No, sweetheart," I said softly as the powerful engine rumbled to life, pulling us away from the curb and leaving the past behind forever. "Your daddy is done hiding. We're finally going to our real home."